Todd Phillips is an Oscar-nominated director, and for some that will make them laugh hysterically, and for others that makes absolute sense because they view him as an unrecognized genius. But what type of director is Todd Phillips? The only way to figure that out though was to watch all of his films. Yes, all of them. So in this video, I'm gonna head back and watch and rank every single Todd Phillips film that he's ever made, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to figure out what type of director Todd Phillips really is. Now let's bring out the clown for this video, which is me because I watched all of these films. First up, let's look at Todd Phillips' first film, Road Trip, and cover your ears kids, but the genre of this film is a boner comedy. Now this is a genre of comedy that has sort of died off recently, and you might be asking why. You might be saying, did these films die because they're extremely one note and not funny? Yes. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up with these type of films, but the entire film was just painfully boring and not funny at all. The main dudes of this film run off this annoying frat humor, and the most funny part of this film is that the movie starts off by calling itself a film. This film is completely antiquated and honestly it's aged pretty poorly, so unless you're nostalgic for Tom Green, it is completely skippable. And if you show this to the wrong crowd though at a party, you might never get invited back. F tier. Now hold up, how would Todd Phillips do though if he had a better cast and more talent? His next film, Old School, is exactly that. We get two great comedic actors and Vince Vaughn. So yeah, it's kinda better. Is it a lot better? No. But the film reins in the douchiness of Road Trip and actually tries to be, you know, an actual movie. This is a completely boring and forgettable comedy, but you know, it also had Snoop Dogg have to rap while a naked Will Ferrell is next to him, so you know, in that way, it's basically a masterpiece if you're a big Snoop Dogg fan. So I'm gonna give this a D tier. Now, after those two stinkers, we are finally on our first good comedy of Todd's career, and it is Starsky and Hutch. And is it because of Todd? No, not really. It's because he gets Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson, who single-handedly carry this entire movie. They take a pretty generic 70s throwback police film and make it genuinely great. Like, watch this scene alone. It should not be funny, but Ben Stiller single-handedly improves it.
Stop with that. That voice makes you sound crazy.
It's not making me sound crazy, it makes me sound like Maury Finkel, founder of Finkel Fixtures, biggest lighting fixture chain in the Southland.
Oh, look at these two hot chickens.
And this is one of Todd's hallmarks that a lot of his detractors say. He's constantly getting bailed out by good actors. But you know, you gotta give him some credit for putting together though these great casts, because when he doesn't have that, you know what happens. But Starsky and Hutch is genuinely a very funny movie, and honestly it's a pretty good comedy. B tier. Here we have our next Todd Phillips film, School for Scoundrels. A film about Napoleon Dynamite going to a fight club, but instead of you beating up imaginary people, it's about how to get a girlfriend if you're a nerd. So yeah, this movie's pretty terrible. The only reason this film is somewhat watchable is because of its cast of Napoleon Dynamite, Dirty Grandpa, and I'm Tired Boss. But it seems Toddy Boy somehow regresses as a filmmaker. He didn't take any of the lessons he learned of working on Starsky and Hutch and applied it here, so we end up getting a film here where it feels like Todd is just coasting instead of trying to actively improve as a filmmaker, which is not the first time we'll see that. D tier. But it might feel that Todd Phillips is running out of goodwill, but Todd had one final lace up his sleeve. A film about a city that I love to hate, a cast of misfits that I love, and a story and a comedy that works together to be Todd's masterpiece. And that's The Hangover. I feel like you've all seen The Hangover. I feel like everyone and their mom has seen it. The Hangover is Todd Phillips' first comedy that really feels like something original and worth watching because it assembles a comedic genius, a sex icon, and also Bradley Cooper and Ed Helms. And the premise of these goofballs getting hungover leads to a comedy that matches the seediness of Vegas and is able to add a truly great cast to make it one of the most iconic and recognizable comedies of the 2000s. Now, is it a perfect comedy? No, not really. I don't think anyone's arguing that. But it is funny. It's got refined douchiness to a T mixed with an actual filmmaking style, and it ends up making The Hangover a masterpiece in Todd Phillips' filmography, and kind of middle of the pack for like any other filmmaker. B tier. But before we finish up the rest of the Hangover trilogy, we're gonna have a quick intermission with one film that Todd ended up making called Due Date, starring RDJ and Zach Galifianakis. Honestly, this film's not really that interesting. It's a decent little comedy, but it does feel like a step back from the creativity of The Hangover. It's just not that interesting of a film, and I honestly just want to go back to talking about the Wolfpack, so let's give this a D tier and move on with our lives. Then we have The Hangover Part 2, and some would say that the director was hungover when he made this film, heyo! Some would say this is a nightmare of a film that somehow makes a boring sequel while also being a bad remake of the first film, and yeah, that pretty much sums it up. The Hangover Part 2 isn't terrible, but it's a film that at its core is really confused. It wants to be a sequel with its characters and ideas, but it's scared to distance itself from the structure of that first film, which ends up leading to a confusing film that just doesn't have any of the originality or heart of that first film. Sure, it still is watchable because the Wolfpack is just so likable that it's hard to hate watching them in this film, but if you're rewatching this trilogy, not a single person is going to ask that you put this on after the first one. D tier. But let's finish up this incredible trilogy with The Hangover Part 3. But here, just like Ocean's 13, he brings The Hangover back to its roots of Las Vegas. Yeah! With a Tom Clancy Hangover movie, wait a minute. This film is bizarrely dark, and it is much more casino than it is Hangover, and basically strips the third film of all the identity of the trilogy that came before. I don't think it really makes the film good or it really makes the film bad, but it does make the film distinct. It doesn't really care about satisfying fans of the first two Hangover films, and it's one of the first times we see Todd doing what he wants with his sequel. And you know what? I think that makes it better than the second one for at least trying to be somewhat of its own thing. I'd still say it's D tier, but I do like it more than Hangover Part 2. But after the Hangover trilogy, I can hear those clown shoes squeakily approaching. But in between the Hangover trilogy and our Clown Prince of Crime film, we have a dramedy about Miles Teller and Jonah Hill being armed dealers during Dick Cheney America. War Dogs. And this is a decent little true story drama comedy film. It's not super funny, but it does have an interesting center of its story. It's well shot and the characters aren't actively annoying you due to the charismatic performances we get once again. This is where we see the rise of what I'd call competent Todd Phillips and his evolution as a filmmaker, because we see he's kind of growing up here. Honestly, I think this film is a pretty decent little true story film, and it earns its spot in the B tier. It's genuinely a good movie. But let's talk about the film you've all been waiting for. Now, here's my greatest Joker gag. You're probably wondering, am I going to be a pretentious Letterboxd snob who hates this movie, or a Reddit incel who thinks this is a masterpiece of cinema? And I'm sorry guys, but unlike the Joker, I'm not a polarized duality of a man, because I don't think it's genius, and I don't think it's the death of cinema either. I think Joker is a totally okay movie. Joker works at its best when you look at it on its surface level. It has incredible production design, an incredible score, and a performance from Joaquin Phoenix that genuinely is worthy of the Oscar he won. It's also okay though to recognize that it's a film that very narrowly dives into its own themes, and it never explores its ideas enough for it to be that smart. And it's an okay drama that only got Oscar buzz and recognized for being genius because people saw it because the Joker was in it. Just like how Arthur only got recognition once he put on the makeup, in a sick sort of way, Todd needed Joker to put him back on the map. And honestly, I think it led to him making a pretty decent film, B tier. But just like Arthur, Todd tried to put the Joker behind him, but he could never seem to shake the stigma of that first film. So he made an entire film about destroying the character of Joker in Joker Folie à Deux. Now, this is a divisive film, to say the least. It's a sequel that seems to hate the fans it's gained from the first one, while also not creating a film stylistically or tonally different enough to garner a new audience that respects it. It's a film that seems to only have been made for two people, Joaquin and Todd. It is about putting the Joker back in the toy box. Does this lead to an absolute mess of a film? Yup. Is it an interesting disaster of a courtroom jukebox musical? Also, yes. But is this a surprising move from Todd? No, not at all. Todd loves making sequels that satisfy him, but don't really satisfy the fans of the first one. And here he pulls out his greatest jongleur joke. He made the fans angry. He made the studio mad by burning the cash in front of their eyes. He made James Gunn's DC studio mad by putting out a critical bomb. And he's the only one happy because he got to burn what he built. And honestly, I think that's pretty hilarious. D tier. And that is every Todd Phillips film reviewed and ranked. And here's the final list of what I think of them. And you might be asking, what do I think about him after watching all of his films by the end of this? Do I think he's a great filmmaker? No. But I don't think he's awful either. I think he's a journeyman director who gets a little too much praise from his fans and now gets way too much hate from his critics. But after all this, I can now confidently say as a well-informed Todd Phillips fanatic, Sean Levy is a better director. Bye.